Nick, I became aware of the film we're talking about today through a little bit of weird happenstance because I became aware of the song that is featured throughout the entire movie.
David Bowie's?
Yeah, in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards.
Ah.
And then retroactively looked up where that song had come from, found Cat People 82, then went around to watching Cat People 42, getting confused about that, watching that film, and then finally resting 4 years later on Cat People 1982. It was a long road.
That's a long. You took the scenic route.
Yeah, exactly. So, but then again, that happened with the filmmakers too. So
they took the scenic route. Yeah. So 40 years after the original, Paul Schrader took it up to make a remake. RKO financed it, and Universal distributed it. This is Cat People. Is it still considered? Would you still kind of regard it as a horror movie?
Yeah, maybe one of the best remakes in the horror genre. We'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Hey folks, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hi everybody, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us, thanks for watching, and once again, thank you for our loyal fans to continue to support the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. We do have a Patreon, check that out for some great deals. We are both members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that website for other critics' reviews as well as ours. Today we're talking about 1982 Remake. I don't know if it... We'll have a little fun debate if it's still a horror movie. It's a lot to unpack. It's Cat People.
All right, so Irina Gallier has arrived in New Orleans to reconnect with her brother Paul, years after they were separated as orphans. There she is drawn to a black leopard at the zoo, where she gets a job and a friend in Oliver. As she and Oliver grow closer, Irina discovers that she and her brother hold a mystical curse as people who can transform into big cats and must kill to become human again.
So I think, right off of the way the explanation of the film, my interpretation, and it may be different from you, is if they don't mate with inside their family, they become cats and they murder their mates. Am I right?
I think it's mates or else just in general feel that bloodlust, because I think she does kill a few people near the end of the film that aren't specifically mated with.
Right.
And again, like what Paul does with the hooker, he doesn't exactly mate with her in that first scene, but he mauls her afterwards. I think there's kind of a bloodlust of trying to make up for it.
It's a little bit of shade. I love Paul. This is why I like Paul Schrader. It's a little bit of loose interpretation, but what I get from the exposition of the fever dream kind of exposition, if they don't mate inside the family, they don't turn into cats and small people. They're almost cursed.
Yeah. So, there's a not even a bloodlust, a lust that leads to bloodlust if you don't.
It's the reverse order, right?
Yeah,
it's lust that leads to blood, and
I feel like maybe that's actually something where Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the television series in the 90s, actually got from this film, was that there was a whole subplot about if a vampire falls in love, he turns into it like a monstrous version of a vampire and can't be sated. It's a whole plot line for the second season of the show. So I wonder if that actually came out of this film. But regardless of it, Paul Schrader needs to do more horror films. Just on the outset, because I've only seen 2 Paul Schrader horror films.
We critique the Card Counter.
Yep. But I've seen Dominion, which was his prequel to The Exorcist, which is fantastic.
There's 2 different versions of that.
Yeah.
Because he had a feud with the production company. If you find 2 different, there's 2 different versions of it.
Yeah, and his is the superior one.
Oh, God, yeah.
So he did that film, he did this film. Like, I've enjoyed a lot of his work that I've seen, but down and out, I think my favorite stuff of his does come down to, like, heavy horror elements, just because he's willing to kind of really get gross and grimy and play around and use theme, but he never forgets story, which is a very important thing to me.
Well, like when we talk about a card counter, when we talk about that film, what I like about Paul is like, should I do this? Yeah.
Yeah, if you're asking, should do.
Should I talk about incest in a movie? Yeah. Let's do that. Paul's not afraid to take chances and take risks. So yeah, we talked about it at just the beginning. It spins on a head. It's a reversal of everything you've seen before. So he takes it and does the complete opposite. It's not a bloodlust. It's a lust of blood. Mm-hmm. And it's not really much a horror movie. It's almost like a Cinemax movie, but is regarded as a horror movie. You'll see it in the category. I'm not going to disagree with it. It is a horror movie. There are horrendous things in it.
Yeah.
And also there's a horror element. They are condemned people. Mm-hmm. No matter how hard you try. And I think the eroticism is played very subtlety. This is really weird because there's a lot of nudity.
It's associated as being a very sex-forward film.
But there's not a lot of Right. Even when Malcolm McDowell is naked, it's not for eroticism. Even when she's out hunting, it's not to, oh, look at her full figure.
She's very shadowed in
and
those
it's
scenes.
shot very awkward. Like you're not putting the light right to show her. So I wouldn't say the eroticism is kind of lost really on me, even though that's what it sells. That's what's on the cover.
Yeah, I don't understand. I do and I don't understand the relationship between like people viewing this film as a erotic thriller kind of an element, because when this whole period where like erotic thrillers disappeared and have been kind of like slowly making their return in cinema, and people have always come up with these lists like the best erotic thrillers ever. Cat People shows up on that list, and I struggle with that because the eroticism is there because sex is so integral to the plot.
Yes.
And I think that's what that comes down to, because you look at that scene, they have like Mulholland Drive and they have Basic Instinct and they have all these erotic thrillers. Cat People doesn't feel like a movie that fits into that realm because it hinges so heavily on gore and graphic violence.
It's very dangerous, too.
Which I don't honestly think of people getting their arms ripped off and think like erotic thriller, man.
Well, this is what you have to do. This is Paul Schrader taking the opposite from the original source of the original Cat People that we critiqued. You can go back and listen to that episode. But he's going to bring it out in the open what they couldn't talk about in the previous movie. You had to dance around the subject that when she in the original Cat People, when she gets charged, she turns into a cat, and she is the interruption of a love story. Where here, Alina is trying to figure out what she wants to be. It's almost like she's searching for her authentic self.
Yeah.
And you get the ending that probably she gets what she wants, but it's not the way that we all want to see. So it's a little bit of the original Cat People, a little bit linear. This is more like a fever dreamish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's closer to like a hybrid of Cat People with like some Holy Motors elements, if you will, because it doesn't really take the straight and forward narrative. There's still a narrative, there's still a story, but it kind of pauses and meanders as it goes. It actually has more of a movement of a cat, where it's kind of slinking through the plot line instead of actually moving straight forward. What's funny is I actually this weekend while watching Cat People, I finished this movie and I was getting ready to watch the new Pixar film Turning Red, which feels very similar because it's about a little girl who's going through puberty and turning into a giant red panda. And it's like, oh my god, it kind of feels the same thing when she gets emotionally charged. She turns into a frickin' panda. The Cat People cinematic universe, folks. When I think about this movie and I think about Paul Schrader's disappointment and how the finished product didn't really appeal to as many audience members as he wanted, he regretted using the title Cat People because he felt that the film wasn't similar enough to what was being done before. That's my favorite kind of horror remake.
I think that's why I enjoy it much more. It is complete opposite of the original. He took the original and just flipped it on its head.
Yeah, because I think like Arena, Oliver, and Alice are I think the only three character names, and it's just the first names that are carried over from the first film. Outside that, it's very loose in terms of how it plays with things. There's not a Paul Kerr in the original film. There's not a brother. No. And then many elements are changed.
That's what the joke is from the original. It's called Cat People, but she's the only one.
That's true. Yeah.
She'd be called Catwoman. But you have subtle elements here that I think is enticing. Like she likes seafood, like how do you eat that and stuff like that. When she dates John Hurd, I want to get back to John Hurd. Oh yeah. But she's fishing for catfish, but she's wearing these like cat burglar boots kind of a thing.
Yeah. The joke is not lost on us. I think that Paul Schrader is having a little bit of fun with the title and with the ideas of it, throwing everything you can at the wall for that. Yeah, eating the sushi and not being a fan of meat, but eating sushi and the fish element there.
And then you got to hire Malcolm McDowell to be super creepy. He loves to be super creepy. Oh yeah. And this is probably his creepiest. I mean, we did Clockwork Orange, we critiqued that, but this is where he's a violently cringy. Where this is actually you just want to take a shower every time he's in the room.
Yeah, he reminds me. He did an episode of Tales from the Crypt where he played a vampire, and that was pretty creepy as well. And I think those are kind of like pretty in tone with how he's doing things because he has kind of an emotional resonance to him. You understand him as a character, but you don't condone anything he's doing, but you understand why he does it. And there's that kind of layer to what he does. What's funny is that McDowell remembered not liking the original Cat People, and so he didn't want to take the role in this film because he was like, I have no memory of that movie being good. And since that time, I don't know if he's revisited the film, but he certainly adds something new, and it's kind of funny that he's a character that is completely original because he didn't like the original film, that he's a new character in this one instead of recreating something old.
So what Paul Schrader is also doing with this movie is not tying into the connection of not only putting out there that it's sexual, but actually sex as its basic element is very animalistic. It's very primal. And I think that's fleshed out very well.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you're going to go to the zoo, but that's the subplot is of, Annette and Oliver's really restraint relationship. Where you have Alina coming in and she breaks all the barriers down. Of Oliver's now completely obsessed. It's almost like he's going back to his primal state of just, I want you.
Yeah. I would like to have known a little bit more between Oliver and Alice. Like, what was the relationship like before Irina showed up?
It's very high school-ish.
Well, and there's moments early in the film before he's met Irina where, like, they share a kiss while at work, and I'm like, hey, it was the 80s. I don't know if things were, I don't understand people working in the 80s having a kiss with their just coworkers. And the fact that, it just takes place so blatantly quick.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm wondering where that relationship was before entering in our new character that's going to throw a tumble. Because, again, we see the original cat people that Oliver is almost, primalistic, unable to control himself around her. And that's what's driving him towards this. And you can decide whether or not you think he has control. But, it's kind of how this film plays out. But I want to know more about that relationship beforehand.
And then I think to bring up another thing that Paul Schrader's talking about is out of control, losing control. And then not to mention the whole, you're already condemned into these hereditary lineage.
Yeah.
And if you're going to break out of it, then you're going to not be a person anymore.
Yeah.
Right. But the element, I love the fever dreamish. It's that very much that red, dreamy kind of, very surrealistic. I love those elements part of the movie.
Yeah.
It's very surrealistic and very early 80s. Like I talked about in Thief, subtlety is gone.
Yeah.
And emphasis, really, 1982, subtlety is completely gone.
Yeah.
And probably won't come back to about the 1990 early 90s.
Yeah, and his dream narrative kind of visual aesthetic that he uses here does carry over into that Dominion prequel film to The Exorcist.
You're right,
where there's kind of that, which was something that was prevalent in the original Exorcist as well, but he kind of combines his style with what was being done there and kind of creates a whole new thing. I even think of that opening with the big cat tree. Part of me kind of wonders if that was recreated in some form for Black Panther's like mystical afterlife realm. Because again, it's a very different
question.
Utilization of it, but it is that giant tree out there.
Very
covered
comic
cats.
booky. I like it because it's just very comic booky. I make comic books, so very comic booky element. So.
Yeah, I love the opening to the film because it's one of the great dream narrative openings where you're not really sure where you are, you're not really sure what the story is at that point, but you don't really care either. You're kind of on for the ride at that point. You decide during that opening red sand narrative if you're in or not.
Another thing I enjoy about this movie is the clash of outdatedness meets new, and we're trying to go into new areas, and this is why the zoo, even though the equipment's outdated, everything is kind of looks like it's outdated. Even the old-fashioned way of fishing, going, so they go to the weekend and all that stuff, and the fashion's a little bit outdated. You have Ruby Dee kind of getting the exposition a little bit. So it's Paul Schrader also investigating that we're transitioning from the in the 80s from what was done in the 40s of we don't have no merged straights anymore. The original Cat People is all about sex, and you could talk about it, but here we can just go out in the open and you can take your clothes off.
Yep. And in that way, I guess he does kind of he embraces the time that has passed, which is again something that's been done very well in other films, like when you can open the doors on a classic narrative, i.e. The Thing from Another World becoming The Thing, The Fly becoming Cronenberg's The Fly, like that embracing of
your authentic style, your own style into that.
Yeah, and really adding something to what would be considered more closed off in the black and white era because you just couldn't do as much technically and you couldn't do as much censorship-wise. And hey, it might have been a good idea that he got Alan Ormsby to write the screenwriter of Porky's 2. Because then he got a guy who is not afraid to write some sex.
Right, because this is a really weird sidebar, but Porky's and Porky's 2, it's slasher film without the slashing.
I never thought of it like that.
It's a slasher film, and voyeurism. Always watch the girls in the shower, but it's it's all about losing your virginity and sex, but nobody's dying. It's always
And then you even have here the first 2 drafts of the screenplay for this film feature an uncredited Bob Clark writing, who of course directed Porky's, Black Christmas, and Christmas Story. And so he did the first 2 drafts. He's uncredited because a lot of stuff pretty much changed out of his hands at that point. Alan Ormsby did the official final draft, but then of course Schrader took a pass over, and you can see some Schraderisms in the finished film. So I'm sure that there was like multiple different versions of this movie as it went through production until the finished product. And I'm very curious to see what that first draft of Bob Clark's looked like in comparison.
I would like
to the
to,
finished
yeah,
film.
because I think it might be a little too close to the original.
I'm thinking so.
And
'cause
Paul's
again,
let's just break the rules here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next thing I want to bring up is John Hurd, one of the most unappreciated actors. If you really, before he made this movie, he did Cutter's Way, which he should have got a nomination for. Him and Jeff Bridges, he was a fantastic in it. But then he went on to do some villainous roles after Cat People. But here, I think John Hurd is trying to show restraint as well as slowly losing control. I think it's wonderful. I think he's one of the unsung heroes of the movie.
Well, it's something that, again, like, he doesn't get anything flashy to do. So that's why he's not, like, he has no flash to his character at all.
Because everybody else is flashy around him.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, not Alice.
But even she gets kind of that, like, she gets the eroticism angle because she gets the pool scene and everything like that, where it's like people are concerned for her as a victim. But when you have John Hurd, who again I know as Papa from Home Alone.
Oh, right.
And of course, like, one of his final roles in Sharknado. But
I just know him as the bad guy in Big.
But John Hurd,
Tom Hanks being a child when he's more childish in the movie. Than yeah.
But he almost turned down this film because he was under the impression that it was a porno. And he was not interested in doing that. And you can even tell, too, that he said in interviews that he was very nervous about nude scenes, sex scenes, all that kind of stuff made him very uncomfortable, which kind of feeds into his character. You know, where he's actually committing some of these acts, and you can see the character's uncomfortable, but I'm pretty sure it's just John Hurd being uncomfortable and not being able to
saying these lines
the
in bed with
her.
her. Right, yeah.
So it kind of works to his benefit because he's a very different Oliver than our 1942 Oliver. And that he brings his own self to the role, and I think unsung, but there's kind of a reason why it's unsung too.
Now O'Toole's in this. Actually married Michael McKean.
I didn't know that until a couple years ago. Actually,
that
I saw it
either,
on his Twitter account.
You can actually catch her in the show Virgin River. I haven't yet to see that Virgin River, but she's in that show. I also want to bring up, before we get to the pool scene, cinematographer John Bailey, one of the most unsung, and we're talking about unsung people, John Bailey, unsung cinematographer. He did Ordinary People, Groundhog Day, Nobody's Fool. I think he did a wonderful job here, especially not so much camera angles, but getting the right aesthetic mood the whole time. This feels dirty, this feels sweaty, this feels like an unsanitary, primal aesthetic.
It's very much the color and the lighting that John brings to this film, because it is it's a very well shot film, but there's nothing ingenuity wise about like where he places the camera and how he holds it and how he moves it. It's all about how can I make the color pop, how can I make the lighting pop, or in some cases not pop. Like I said, it would be very easy to take Natassja Kinski's nude walk through the darkness and try to light it up because you want everyone to see.
That's what I was talking about.
He reduces, he allows it to come down to its simplest place. And you know where as a cat owner, my cats exist in the darkness in the middle of the night. They are not in the light. They are always like, my brother came to stay with me and he left the bathroom in the middle of the night and one of the cats run in front of his leg. Like, cats exist in the darkness. They're nocturnal beings. And so again, he takes the smart choice, which may not have been, he could have been like the voyeuristic, let's brighten up that nude scene. And he doesn't. He pulls it back. And I respect that.
Also, John Bailey went on to direct one movie, China Moon, which I consider one of the most underrated movies of even the 90s. So maybe that's a movie that we can put on our list to critique. China Moon with Ed Harris. One of the most compelling, actually really shot film, great movie. But now when you realize why it's shot really well, it's John Bailey who actually did cinematography before he did directing. So check, if you want to interested, another sidebar, China Moon. All right, Paul Schrader, he had to do it. He had to put the Val Newton bus scene in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
You had to do it.
That's
but he
what
puts
I
a
think
crane
is so funny
shot
about
on it. But does the crane shot of it. Because, the original one is just set the camera still and it's a jump scare. But here you get a wide shot of the whole bus and the whole thing and the pool and everything. So
that's what I think is so unique about this. I've seen so many Paul Schrader interviews. The man is not subtle in his day-to-day life. I think he called The Card Counter the best film of last year, which is his own movie. And he's done that before. He's not shy about his thoughts on Taxi Driver, his thoughts on being fired and then rehired for the Exorcist prequel. He's not like willing to hide a lot of the stuff that he has. And so that's why I think it's so interesting that he did go back to Cat People as much as he did. Because knowing him as a director, I would immediately think, okay, title, maybe a couple character names, nothing the same. And that's what a lot of people say about it. But yeah, some of the scenes are recreated. Just barely. And like some of the mood elements, some of the initial story machinations. He goes back to the well more than I expected him to for a guy that's, kind of full of himself.
But it doesn't seem like it's just inserted for nostalgia. It's actually part of the scenery, part of the story.
Yeah.
And if you didn't recognize the original movie and you just put that in there, it's like, okay, that's a great setup because it's an old-fashioned pool, just like in the movie.
Exactly, yeah.
And you kind of do it 80s styles. Well, and then take off your shirt. You're going in the pool.
Yeah.
And then you got the tears up the shreds and everything. But the overall, I still think it's one of the best, maybe one of the best remakes.
Yeah, the problem is it's sitting in a time period where we had, like, at the same time, we had The Thing, and we had The Fly coming out a couple years later, and then, like, this film's in there. It's in that mix.
And it came out, like, in February.
Yeah.
Which is really a dead zone almost for films.
Yeah, and it's also, what I really appreciate, too, is I don't think, at the time, it sounds like to me many people knew about Cat People 42 in the way that they knew about The Thing from Another World or the original Fly.
Yeah.
Because those were made by a little bit more well seen at the time, I do think, and like re-releases for both those films were a little bit more prevalent, those black and white originals. So I don't think this one was even considered in the same way a remake, even though it was. So it's kind of that odd thing where it's been forgotten to time. Thankfully, the David Bowie song brought me to it.
Yeah, I heard somebody mention me on social media that they got the single "Last Dance" and on the back was David Bowie's "Cat People," which at the time seems kind of cringy.
I think there was a like single version of it that was different than the one that appeared in the movie as well. So that could be why that's the case.
So at the time, it was really super taboo. It was shown as shocking and salacious, but here I think it's a little dialed down from what we've seen after what came out afterwards. So it's almost like, oh yeah, we thought this was dangerous filmmaking at the time.
Well, it's really that sex is part of the plot, sexuality is part of the plot. And incest appears as a plot point, which you're all automatically thinking like, okay, yeah, that is salacious, that's scandalous, but it's done in a way where I guess we can view it in a post Game of Thrones world.
It's not as shocking anymore. We're kind of their shock's kind of wore off when we go back and like, oh yeah, this was scandalous to talk about at the time.
Yeah, but it's one of my wife's favorite movie experiences. She's never seen the original, so she's seen this remake a couple of times and she's a fan of that. So, but now the question is, what do you think about Cat People 1982? Is it one of the best horror remakes ever made? How the hell did
we get the 20 minutes to talk about? We didn't even talk about Natassja.
Oh my God. Pause for a second. We have to talk about Natassja Kinski, who famously had an affair with Paul Schrader while filming was going on. He fell in love with her, tried to propose to her, and she said, "I sleep with all my directors, but you were hard work." So
it's good to know. But you made it work, right? Yeah.
So,
well, Paul, you make art for, you fall in love with the art piece, and it's almost like the red shoes. You become my product, and
But Natassja Kinski, Klaus Kinski's niece or daughter?
I think, there's some relationship in there.
Yeah, there's some connection to that. But Natassja Kinski, of course, has to embody so much and not really act. Like, she can't really perform with dialogue. She doesn't have a lot of dialogue.
Well, she's a model initially, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so she was comfortable with what they're going to do in the movie.
Yeah. So she'd appeared in a couple other films previously, but never really given the full reins of a leading role, to my knowledge. So that would have been kind of a tough call, tough sell, I'm sure, to the studio. Yeah. But when you're making horror, you get left behind and get to do whatever you want a little bit more frequently. So,
but she's the whole center of the universe of this whole entanglement.
Yeah. Her character.
This is her first film, right?
Yeah. First film was, I think, a lead. I think she definitely done some supporting stuff.
Okay,
but never really.
I'm going to clarify. First film that she carries the entire movie.
Yeah, more so. And if she doesn't work, the film doesn't work, which is a tough thing to give to a first time leading actress.
Yeah. So all right, now
have you seen Cat People? And is it one of the best horror remakes ever made? It's not.
I really don't consider it a horror. Like, they take away every time there's a horror movie, a thing of horror. They pull the camera away. Even when Ed Bailey's gone,
he gets his arm ripped off. You see the arm like.
Or they do that. They do that. That's from American Werewolf in London. That thing with his hand almost becomes like a furry cat.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I think it's horror just because it really comes down to certain scenes that really embrace the horror, and it's things like that hooker scene is still like disturbing to me. That when she takes the tumble down the stairs, she's nude and she's got claw marks, in areas that we don't get comfortable
You
talking about.
never really see the horror. Your brain tells you.
Yeah, but in that same way, we don't see a lot of the horror for Jaws, and people consider that a horror film.
No,
and I'm a little nebulous
We just
on that
see
one.
heads and limbs floating in the water. Yeah.
If Alien's a horror movie, then so is Cat People.
Okay. All right.
But what do you think? Do you think one of us is right, one of us is wrong? Do you exist in the middle somewhere? And which is your favorite Cat People film? Because we've covered two of them.
We already covered, yeah.
And I do think one day we're going to have to come back to Curse of the Cat People as soon as I can get a copy of it. So let us know you're down in the comment section below your thoughts on the finished film and your thoughts about it as a horror remake. And while you're down there, please like and subscribe. They're 2 free things that you can do that help to support the channel. They make sure you never miss new episodes as we drop them Mondays, Thursdays, Scary Movie Saturdays. And hey, go ahead and check out the link to that Patreon too. That's down below, and you can join some of our patrons helping us pick movies that we cover on the show.
Pick some more Paul Schrader movies, and you know who would like to, if we do more Paul Schrader? Paul Schrader.
Yeah. It'd be his favorite episodes.
Yeah, you'll definitely like it.
Exactly. So thanks for joining us, guys. You can find all my film reviews over at GoFilmReviews.com.
Hey, you can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts. And I'm not eating catfish.